Yes, please. Thank you, everyone who is in the room joining us. Thank you, Dr. Guy, for introducing our special podcast recording. My name is Maditito Motiane, or Dr. Mott. I am a postdoc research associate in the Mad Lab, undergraduate research lab, working with the Department of Psychological Science, and I'm so excited for this recording. My guest today is Dr. Michele K Lewis, and this is the biological signatures of her academic journey. So we have Dr. Lewis hooked up to some biofeedback equipment, and while we talk about her experience as an academic, we talk about her research, we talk about what we're going to be seeing with the biofeedback, we will actually see her feedback in real time, and she will tell us what we're seeing or what is happening in her body that is showing up on the equipment. So for the people in the room, the feedback will be projected onto the screen, and we will be able to see it as the recording goes on. Dr. Lewis is a professor of psychology. She has been at Winston-Salem State University for 18 years. She was chair of the department. She was chair of the department from 2014 to 2019. She is also the author of her latest book, which is Our Biosocial Brains, which is the cultural neuroscience of bias, injustice, and power. So as we pull up the biofeedback on the screen, welcome, Dr. Lewis. Can I ask, the first question is for you to tell us what we are seeing on the screen.
Hello, and thank you for having me. I am happy to be here. Thank you, Dr. Guy. And so right now, in real time, this is an indication that I am alive. You're seeing the output of my brain activity, and there won't be much fluctuation in terms of the brain frequency because I am very alert. I don't feel drowsy. I am definitely not daydreaming or anything like that.
Hopefully not.
So most of the output that you see there in terms of the frequency is showing that my brain is functioning, processing pretty rapidly, indicative of the fact that I am in an alert state of consciousness.
Okay, we also have you hooked up to the skin conductance monitor, which is what is on your fingers, and that will tell us what?
So this is the galvanic skin response, which we call a GSR. And some of you may be familiar with psychophysiological tests where people are being tested for lie detection. So I don't think that you will be asking me any questions that would prompt me to lie.
We'll find out.
However, if I did start to feel anxious or sweating a little bit over something that comes up in our dialogue, a GSR could detect information like that, although it does have false positives, so that's something we always let students know where something like a lie detector test is concerned.
Okay. Can you tell us what got you started on brain science, brain and behavior?
Sure. I was quite young because I was an undergraduate. I want to say I was probably a sophomore in college because I attended Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia, here in the United States, and I was a psychology major from the start, and I took a course called, it wasn't called Brain and Behavior, it was just called biopsychology. And I didn't like having to train the rats because I did have to go in on the weekends and take the rats out of the cage and put them into the experience of classically conditioning them, teaching them to learn that when they hear the sound, run over and press the bar so they can get the food. So with the exception of that part, I was fascinated by everything I learned about the brain, and not the abnormalities, but just our everyday functioning, like we're doing now, looking at just normal brain output and understanding how and what these kinds of things mean and why our brain is so important to our everyday lives. That fascinated me. So it was my favorite class. So after that, I stuck with it for graduate school.
What is the coolest thing you have found when you were doing this research with the brain? So thinking about brainwaves or biofeedback.
I initially was most interested in sleep and memory, and even recently I discovered new research that I wrote about in a Psychology Today column that I have, what you should know about your mind after midnight. And I think why that fascinated me so much is because so many people, especially the students, they tell me they're awake between 12 and sometimes 3:30 in the morning, and that's so not the most healthy thing to do.
Why?
Because the studies I read, they were saying that this is when you're more likely to have food cravings and have, ingest things that you probably shouldn't. It also is when your mind is more likely to ruminate on negative thoughts. And there's also been some indication that there might be an increased chance for people to act out violently, right? Not saying it causes, but there's suggestions that, during those hours, we really should be asleep.
Wow.
Yeah. Let alone the concentration and cognitive.
So what is it? Is it that the part of your brain that sort of helps you keep things like that in check is crashing out?
I think the simplest way to say it is it's a replenishment time. Yeah, just like how we need a certain amount of hours of sleep. And also here at WSSU, a couple of times I taught the Contemporary Issues senior seminar, and I focused on dream life. And it's been a popular topic that the students enjoy. And even in that class, we talk about how a clinical psychologist, Dr. Edward Bruce Bynum, says that 3 a.m. is when you're most likely to have a proliferation of dreams that can help you feel more connected to like your collective unconscious, where you're dreaming about family members and maybe even family members who are now ancestors and things like that. And so I think if you are awake at that time, you're missing out on some good stuff that you could be getting.
This leads us to a really good question that I got from one of our colleagues who was asking about the relationship between our brains and sort of our spirituality. And I think that's what you're bringing in thinking about the connection with ancestors or maybe the dreamscape. And so her question specifically was, do you see a connection between brain and spirituality? If so, how do you experience or understand that connection?
So I think I do.
Okay.
And once again, I'll go back to the same author. He's one of my favorite authors, Edward Bruce Bynum, and he is a clinical psychologist. And so he has a book called Our African Unconscious. And in that book, he talks about the collective nature of humanity. Well, oftentimes in psychology, those are topics we're not talking about because for quite some time, talking about spirituality in psychological science was kind of taboo. However, I think if we can combine a discussion of spirituality with the cultural neuroscience, you begin to understand how there are some things like meditative yoga and understanding the significance of the unconscious, that you start to understand how you can kind of elevate your consciousness some so that you do feel more connected to other human beings, both when you are awake and when you are asleep. So, yes, I very much so support that.
That's very interesting. I am an African spiritualist. It's how I would define my spirituality. And I have heard of people who I think like need to get messages of connection having insomnia at 3 a.m. So it's very interesting that you said 3 a.m. because I've heard that also. That like 3 a.m. is the time to sort of wake up and commune, if you will.
Or commune while you are
Sleeping.
Yes, because I think being awake at that time, as I said earlier, you're missing out on some potential tapping into some messages, I think, that come from the collective unconscious.
Do you think you need to be asleep to get messages?
You don't need to be. You don't need to be. However, I think sleep deprivation has not only physical health consequences, but also spiritual health consequences. I always ask my students, like, how many hours of sleep do you all get? Like, around what time do you go to bed? Around what time do you get up? You know? How
much sleep did you get in grad school? Because I am recovering from grad school and teaching myself how to sleep, and it's been tough to learn to sleep at like 10 o'clock, and that's okay.
I have always prioritized my sleep, even in graduate school. I think I just feel out of sorts if I haven't rested. And then today we can take advantage of technology because our smartphones now pretty much tell you what your pattern is of how often you're moving and touching your phone, and so it's recording that for you, that data, and it'll tell you. Each evening around 10 p.m., you start to slow down in terms of not picking up your phone as much. And around this time, you go back to that phone. So you can kind of now even see and look at your device and get some information that can help you with monitoring your sleep. What time do you go typically?
I don't want to talk about my sleep hygiene. Okay, because I do have my phone and do scroll through social media sometimes more than I should. I have started trying to like listen to an audiobook, and that way the phone can be away. But when I used to wear a smartwatch, that would also tell you, and I guess that's another form of biofeedback, because it would tell you when you were in deep sleep and sort of when you woke up and things like that. And so that's interesting, because that would just be heart rate, I imagine.
Yeah, and breathing, respiratory.
Yeah, no, it's my sleep hygiene is developing.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna work on that with you.
Thank you. Yeah. So, what kind of experiments were you doing other than conditioning the rats and training them? What kind of research were you doing in undergrad, but also probably in grad school as you were specializing in brain and behavior?
Yeah, so when I was talking about the rat, that was undergrad,
okay,
right? Because that was just a part of the course.
That's what you get the undergrads to do.
Yeah, we had to do that as a part of our course requirement in undergrad. Definitely by the time I went to Howard for graduate school, I was doing more cognitive. So my research was on memory, and I wasn't doing anything in the electrophysiology or psychophysiological realm. I was just doing more cognitive neuropsych type stuff, and my advisor also taught brain and behavior, and so we were just very interested in memory. I don't know if it's still like this because I was in graduate school like a gazillion years ago, but but you know, back then it is the case that a lot of times people ended up going deeply into whatever their academic advisor was doing, because you would talk about those topics so much, and I found what he was doing to be interesting, and he was a memory person. And at the time, I just was very curious about memory. And I don't know if anybody in the room is familiar or you are with, it's actually a game. And it's called Simon. And it's a circular game, and different colors light up on it. And it gives you a pattern of colors lighting up. And the further along you go, it gets faster, faster, and the sequence gets longer and longer. And so you have to remember. So it'll start off, and then you press. Then next time, and so you're repeating what it does, but it's going to speed up, and it's going to get longer. So I incorporated that into my dissertation project.
Okay.
So the research participants had to engage with that game, as well as remember some spoken words that they heard on audio. They had to also look at a series of photographs, and then later, without being told they were going to have to do this, they had to identify which faces they had seen before. So it was a recall and a recognition task. And I'd like to look up there because I am so proud of myself that I can remember the details of my dissertation from so long ago. I would have never thought I could do that.
Is that the part where you're relaxed, where we kind of have like a straight, like, not a lot of amplitude?
Yeah, but remember, like, notice what you're seeing up there is, as I was saying at the beginning, I can't afford to daydream and be relaxed here, so that's why.
Because we do have a live audience.
Yes, online and in person. And so, but I'm very pleased with myself that I could remember that.
Yeah,
But,
I mean.
because I haven't answered that question in years.
Thinking about your research?
Yeah, that was like 19, I shouldn't say.
No, you could say 1992?
1990, 91.
Okay.
1990.
Okay. The joke was, when we were preparing for this podcast, is that when Dr. Lewis started grad school in 1987, I was born.
And I didn't even know that. But yeah, wow. Time for me to retire.
Well, yes. No and yes. But thinking about retirement, and so thinking about your career progression, because you have, been a professor of psychology at different institutions, at Winston-Salem, obviously, for 18 years, but then also, in various leadership positions. And I just wanted to hear more about your experience sort of progressing through your career. So finishing grad school in 1992, those early professor roles, kind of what was that like? How did you navigate your career? Did you intend to be back at an HBCU?
Oh, that's a great question. Let's see what's going on up there. Well, it's interesting you say back at, I guess you're referring to having attended an HBCU
yes.
for graduate school. Because my work experience prior to coming here, another indication of my age, I had already been a professor for 15 years before I came to WSSU.
Okay.
And they were not HBCU environments. The very first position I took was as a lecturer, and it was all the way on the West Coast. So I was living in D.C., having attended Howard, so my first lecturer position was in California.
Ooh.
And so I lived there for one academic year. I don't, I'm looking up there because right now I'm trying to figure out if I should say I enjoyed the experience.
Okay.
I enjoyed the experience.
In California?
Yes.
Okay.
That position.
Okay.
Where I was not probably at that time a very popular area of California. I wasn't in the South, in LA, and I wasn't in the more northern part of like San Francisco. I was kind of in the desert area.
Outskirts.
Yeah, in the middle. Very hot, very dry, and I remember being very different than I am now. Yeah, I was, even though I had taught as a graduate assistant, as many grad students do. Did you?
Not as a grad
assistant?
student.
Okay.
So I taught before I started my PhD. I had taught in high school, but I also did teach. I was a lecturer at a university before, but I didn't teach throughout my grad school. I'm teaching now.
Okay. Yeah. I remember being very nervous about just mostly like, could I fill the time? You know, because I was thinking, wow, this class is 75 minutes. What am I going to talk about the whole time? Because back then, for students in the room, we mostly just lectured.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't like it is now where, you know,
there's activities.
if you tried to just do a lecture for 75 minutes, you know, it wouldn't work in the same way. So, yeah, I remember being nervous. So if I had been connected to a GSR back then, I would have been sweating. And I remember getting some negative feedback when I believe it was some type of break. Maybe it was like a fall break or something. And, you know, we had like a few days off, and I came back, and I remember the department chair wanted to see me. And I was like, oh my God, like what? You know, because I was already nervous. And I remember she told me, oh, some students, like they complained because they said, you're just mostly reading from the book, right? But that was because I was nervous, right? And now I couldn't imagine doing that, because now I can literally like walk into a classroom with no preparation and
know what
teach.
that is the time to retire.
Yeah, yeah. I don't
when
have
you're
to,
no longer prepared.
Yeah, I don't have to, you know, really sweat about, you know, anything that I teach now. Well, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, and so what made you move back away from California, and how did you what did you use to pick the institutions that you were at, or the next job, or did you just take the next job that?
So I kind of knew that I wasn't going to stay. I felt, I think similar to you, like I'm kind of an African spiritualist, and I go off of
energy.
Yeah, and it just wasn't the environment for me. So plus I'm a lifelong Southerner, East Coast, and it was okay to be out there as an experience, but I never felt like that was going to become my home. So. Yeah.
And when you say Southerner, where are you from?
I'm from the state of Virginia.
Oh, okay. Oh, so this is a very distinctly American thing. When I moved to North Carolina, somebody said, you were in the South. I said, I'm in North Carolina. So it takes a while for me to recognize that Virginia's in the South.
Oh, yeah. Most people do not. That's not uncommon.
Okay.
That's not, that people say, oh, Virginia, that's...
Geographically north, right?
It's north of North Carolina. But if you know U.S. history, anybody who was trying to escape the horrors of slavery would not have stopped in Virginia because that was not a free state. Yeah, you would have had to have gone to keep going.
Oh my gosh.
Past Washington, D.C., past Maryland. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a social construction of North and South.
Yeah, I think even a lot of, when I lived in D.C. for years, there are people in D.C. who don't think they're Southern. And I'm like, if you kind of know some of the colloquialisms that you hear them saying and where they have relatives.
They're Southerners.
Yeah.
So what's North then?
So you had to, this arbitrary line, I don't want to say the name.
Okay.
I could, but
okay.
I know what it is, but I don't want to say it. Yeah, you would have kept going if you would have been safe once you got over into Delaware, Pennsylvania. Safer.
Okay.
And I say safer because still, as long as the institution of slavery was legal, there were people who could be captured and sent back.
Kidnapped.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. And so can you talk to me about, like, so I am a postdoc research associate and I'm trying to think or map out where my career would go. And what was it like to become a department chair? Did you like it? I don't want to put you under pressure. You can just say I liked it even if you didn't like it.
Could you repeat the question?
So can you talk to me about like navigating your career? So being a professor and then becoming department chair.
Okay. Well, okay, so I'll start by saying I was a chair at another institution before coming here. Smaller. It was smaller. It was private. And
your finger.
It slipped off.
I don't know why. Let's just touch it.
Yeah, that one's pretty loose.
This is what happens in a live recording.
Yeah, live recording.
No?
I don't know.
We could take it, pull it out and back in.
How funny once you started talking about department chair.
We can move away from Suddenly the conduction is going.
Dr. Guy's giggling.
Arousal.
Is it? I broke the machine. So, do you want me to continue?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so the prior institution was a PWI, smaller and private. And I was the only black person in the department. And so that was that experience. And then here, I think for me, because WSSU has the rotating chair model, for me, I never felt like it was something that I would be doing forever. But there was a time, like during those 5 years, where it seemed like I kept extending it, longer than I ideally would have wanted to. Just because of the makeup of the department at the time. We had, more untenured people. And I think for me, because I am a person who enjoys thinking about thinking, and I read a lot, and I write a lot, I find that being a chair is not good for me because it takes away from my time that I need to be doing those other kind of cognitive things. Because, it's a lot of paperwork.
Yeah, admin.
And,
So you were happy to step down?
Yes.
Dr. Guy is also nodding his head profusely in the audience.
Yes.
Okay. This is another question from another colleague who asked about how social media influences our motivation and emotions regarding gender and sexuality.
Wow. I mean, deeply it does.
Okay.
Particularly as the research shows for middle school and teenage persons identifying as female. Just because of the social comparison.
To 10,000 more people as opposed to just the 100 in your school.
Yeah, the social comparison, and then, I've had conversations with people around, well, if the experience is so aversive, then why don't they just get off of it? And I'm like, well, because it's also addictive. It's addictive, to the brain in a way, like when you get those likes and you're looking and then you're comparing how many likes are you getting to somebody else, and I think as a more mature-brained person, you can kind of more understand that it's not a realistic interpretation of reality of what you're seeing. Like, I think with maturity, you can kind of better understand that it's a curated presentation online. But when you're younger, you may believe, oh, everybody's life is so much more fabulous than mine. You know, and then even conversations around like I learned that there's this thing called Instagram boyfriends. I didn't even know what that was
until
I started talking to younger people. Apparently it was, I don't know if it still is, but where your boyfriend takes all your pictures for you and posts them for you, and so it's almost like you're a model and he's there to support you, and then
on your account or his account? On your account.
Your account.
Okay.
And then also, you know, just sensitivities around whether or not people publicly admit that they're in relationships. I don't even think that's necessarily only a younger age thing. I think that could also apply to people as they continue to age. You know, why aren't you like posting me or indicating that you're in a relationship? And yeah, so I think all of those things are just a part of the social norm now. But I did read recently that it's becoming cool now to be in the Gen Z age group and not be into social media, to not want to do it, because it's kind of cool now to be
off the grid.
Yeah, like somebody who's not doing it. So, which I think
so many thoughts.
yeah, so, you know.
I think my first thought is I read research quite early on that they paid psychologists to figure out what would keep people addicted to social media. And so there was, I don't know if there still is, I imagine there still is, a team whose job was to curate the experience to make it so that it's addictive to your brains, right? And I saw a documentary recently that was talking about like Amazon and how they would do beta testing to figure out like how big do they need to make the buy now button? What color should the button be? And so social media definitely did that to make it. And I use that as I have a 10-year-old who wants a phone and all these things, and I'm just like, and wants to play video games, and my reasoning is just like, it's addictive. We are all already addicted. There's no need for you to be addicted.
She doesn't have one yet.
She doesn't have a phone, no.
Okay. Yeah.
And I won't let her get video games, just because the kids now are on the headphones, so they're on the phone with friends playing this game, and I'm like, why don't you just go to the friend and play a game?
You know, that reminds me that this semester in my lifespan development class, I asked the students, did they experience doing sleepovers, like with a best friend, you know, like, because once upon a time around 6, 7 years old, that was like a thing. And very few of them had done it, and so I was like, oh, is that another thing that has become extinct? This having that developmental experience, because these kinds of social experiences are also really good for us as humans. And so I think engaging with the technologies that we all now have, it is producing or correlated with a lot more anxiety. Have you read this book, The Anxious Generation?
I haven't.
Yeah, it's been like a top seller for a couple. Yeah, I think it came out maybe early last year. I'm not going to try to say the author's name because I may mess it up, but it's called The Anxious Generation. And
so who is the Anxious Generation?
Well, your daughter's age,
so Gen Alpha, I think they are?
And through the Gen Z. And he's suggesting from his research that the smartphone shouldn't be doled out until around 16. I think would be really hard to do, don't you think?
That's my rule. That's what.
So
she's not getting a phone until
she's got to wait
16.
6 more years.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. Just because, and you know, I don't know if you know this about Southern Africa, but Southern Africa has the highest rate of gender-based violence, femicide, and so in my mind, there's no reason for anybody to have unfettered access to a child before they develop maturity in certain ways. And so that's my standing on it. Now, if my parents were watching, they would tell you that I probably cried to get a phone at like.
Oh.
I probably was around 13 when I got my first cell phone. And so it is an ongoing thing. But currently, in terms of the fact that they have psychologists making this addictive, the fact that it's harder to ensure security when there is this phone, that kind of is my stance. And of course, it'll change. Like I don't know if I'll hold out until 16, but I think that also for me, in terms of sleepovers, is part of why it's hard to have a sleepover culture. Is we in South Africa currently, there's actually a big case where a child was molested at school, and so it really is hard to keep kids safe. And so having a sleepover, you can't control who's over there. People's brothers have been molesting people. So that might be part of why sleepovers.
I know, because there's a different culture of fear now that is embedded in parenting that didn't used to exist.
That's true.
And so yes, but the reason I brought that up is because not only is this short form content like you see on TikTok, it's a physiologically addictive, but I think psychologically, like there's become like a disconnect between humans that is also related to some of the struggles that people are having.
Because we become voyeuristic, right? Like I can feel connected to you because I see you every day on my feed, and I don't have to exert any effort to know you.
Yeah. I don't know how you might feel about this. There's also an argument that people now want to sit and listen to podcasts like this rather than talk to people for real. They want to listen to people talk to each other rather than talk to them.
When she started, and I hate to make this about my daughter, but when she started watching YouTube, I had to ban YouTube because she would watch people playing on YouTube.
What do you mean?
Like, you can watch someone play with their toys and just like, literally just go, oh, here's my dog, hi doggy. Like what you would be doing as you play, they watch someone on a video doing it. And I'm just like, what are you watching?
Oh my gosh. But there's also ads out now that says there are actual advertisements telling people why you need an AI friend. I'm just telling you.
And it's easy to have an AI friend, right? Because you can switch it off when you want. It doesn't hold you accountable. You don't have to invest in getting to know it. In fact, the AI is very quick to say, I'm not, I can't engage in that way.
Yeah. All of this has consequences for our brain. I'm telling you. It's not good.
So what do you think it does? It denies us the opportunity to be... Because what I see... Cause I never knew that people were anxious growing up. Like, this is a new thing. And I wasn't sure if it's because I'm in the U.S. or if just generationally we are more open about the fact that we are anxious. But I'm interested to hear about this anxious generation because I never knew of anxiety as widespread as it is now.
I think I like, I don't want to keep plugging this other book, but I read it mostly because I was trying to understand, especially given the context in which we work. We're here at a university, and it's something that we've been hearing about for a while. Like, college students have a lot of mental health challenges, and a lot of it is anxiety. And so obviously the question arises, well, where did all this anxiety come from? I mean, because feeling anxious is a normal part of being human, but we didn't hear about that a lot. To your question earlier, like what was the difference when I started being a professor as to now? Okay, now you cannot, no matter what you teach, no matter your discipline, you cannot disregard mental health of students who might be in your class?
Because my theory is that the testing culture in the US creates or elevates anxiety. Because I never wrote a high stakes exam until I was 15 years old. And now, as soon as you are in the 3rd grade, there's high stakes testing at the beginning, middle of the year, and end of the year. And so that was something that I noticed, that like students are anxious about tests. I'm like, why would you be anxious about a test? It's just a way for you to show what you know. But the testing culture has made it so high stakes. The entire enterprise, like when it's testing time, you'll get an email from the class teacher telling you what to do in terms of sleep, how to feed your child. You get messages from the principal telling you how to feed your child, what to do, what to say.
You're saying you
I do,
that
yeah, that's
with
what I
your
get in the
10-year-old?
US. Yep.
Oh, wow.
Because 3rd grade is what, 8 years old? Yeah.
Yeah.
So from 3rd grade, that's when the teacher would go, it's very important that they try their best. They have to do well. Please teach your child to just, relax, and breathing technique, like all these things. And I'm like, this child is not anxious. You are anxious because obviously there's like consequences in terms of finances. But like, I don't blame the kids is what I'm saying.
So, yeah, I think what I'm thinking about, that the culture though, the testing has been with us for quite some time. So do you think it just took a while for it to lead to more mental health issues? Because this testing culture has been with us for a while. Like, so how do you think it?
I think the stick element of it, so the consequences to funding, and especially federal funding associated with test results, I don't think was as dire before as it is now. And so as a teacher, because I heard this from a teacher, not at my daughter's school, but at another school, who would say, at the beginning of the year, I try to get them to test low. Because the policy keeps changing, right? So now it's about growth scores. And so at the beginning of the year, she doesn't mind if they score low, because then at the end, she can show that there has been growth. And so you can see a gaming of the system because the consequences are so dire. Because as a teacher at the end of the year, you have to account, like you had these students and your growth scores are low, or your achievement scores are low.
Yeah. Yeah, I think to a question you had asked me earlier, it's related. So that might also be why it feels a lot different now to being a professor than when I started, because the questions that you're more apt to get from students now is not focused as much on content. Like, say, getting an email from a student about the content of what you were covering in class, or someone coming up at the end of a class to basically ask for clarification on content. Like, mostly you get asked about attendance,
grading,
my grade,
extra credit.
Here's my grade. Yeah, and so maybe I understand that it's anxiety, but to what you're saying, I guess that started developing way back in terms of performance, anxiety, and concern about how well I'm doing.
And being valuable because of what you can do. So I remember when you and I were having a conversation before, I was saying, I found, because when my daughter came, she was in school, I found that she was open to learning and open to hearing new things. As soon as she was in the US school system, suddenly I know. So anything you tell her, she's just like, I know. And it's, for me, I could see the connection that she's in an environment where you are rewarded when you know, and you feel belittled when you don't know. And so you want to be the person who knows all the time, which closes you off to learning. And I was a sub for one psychology class here at Winston-Salem State, and I found that the students don't try. Like, they don't put themselves out there to try something if they don't know that they'll get it right. And I think that's just part of it, is if you don't get it right, it's shameful. And so you shouldn't try. Like, it's easier just not to try and ask for help. before
Yeah.
you even try.
So it probably feels really aversive to be faced with even like an inkling of, I don't know.
Yeah.
So to reduce the anxiety, the feeling of the anxiety, like maybe you quickly say, oh,
Yeah, I know. And then they don't ask you again. Exactly.
Yeah. So I don't know. So maybe we should be working on like what could we do to make the environment more relaxing.
But I don't even know how we can do that in higher education if they have 12 years of not that.
Mm-hmm. True, because it's already the cultural impact is already there. Yeah.
But that brings me to something you had mentioned before around students and interacting. Like, do you find that students are, I know you say they interact more in relation to grades, but even in class discussions, are people open to, let's see your brain, your brain waves. I saw you breathing heavy there. Just to answering questions, to interacting even within the classroom environment.
I'm going to say it probably depends on the topic, the subject matter. Because, like, in the lifespan development class, it's a late afternoon class. It's only 50 minutes from 5 to 5:50. I remember getting lots of engagement in a kind of excited way when I asked them, do they know what consensus is? And I told them I wanted them to use the consensus model to work it out amongst themselves what was going to be the format of their second quiz. And because it was again about testing and a grade, and I said, you all work it out amongst yourself. I'm going to step out of the room. And when I come back, give me your decision. And when I left the room, the volume of talking, they were so deeply talking. And it was very animated. It was a lot of Q&A. There was a lot of working it out and different people wanting to be heard. And it was great. It was great. And actually, they have so far done the best on that quiz because they got to decide the format of how they wanted it. And I got to reject certain things that I was like, it's not going to be that.
What was the first proposal? Everyone gets 100.
No. The format of the exam. So I rejected, they wanted to do something with Kahoot or something, and I was like, no. And I rejected, I think it might have been true false or something. But it ended up being like something that they were happy with and that I was happy with. So we used consensus. But I think, to your point about the grades still being the
driving force?
Yeah, they were very socially engaged for that experience.
Which in a capitalist world kind of tracks, right? Because that is, even in life, what will be driving our behavior.
Yeah.
So you find that they interact, because I think one of the things that I realized when I got, well, I don't even want to say when I got here, teaching in higher education, is that students don't engage as much with professors. And I know there's a hierarchy inbuilt in higher education where a professor is all-knowing, and so you shouldn't argue with them, or you can't argue with them, or debate with them.
I don't, you know what? Let me pat myself on the back.
Okay.
I usually don't have I have not had those issues, like, because I think I'm very, like, personable with students, and I've never had any issues with students, like, feeling that I'm approachable. And I think, though, to this generational thing, though, I do see the hesitancy to answer questions. And I hope, that didn't used to be. There used to be a time where
you could hardly get the question out before somebody's hand was up. But I think, it's that anxiety. Because if you raise your hand, everybody's going to look at you.
And you don't want to be looked at. Oh, my God. Do you think adults, like people who are older, are also getting more anxious? Like, is the world just becoming more anxious?
You just indicated how parents are more anxious now.
Around sleepovers?
Sleepovers, playing outside without monitoring. I mean, that's why I love the cultural neuroscience, because our brains now, parents' brains now, because I'm not a parent, so I'm going to put it on you, I think is more on alert about stranger danger in a way that, didn't used to be. And so some people might argue, well, is the world more dangerous now than it used to be, or have we just been made to feel that it is because of media, like everything we see in movies and social media? Like, is the world really so much more dangerous now than it was? In some ways, maybe in terms of mass shootings.
In this country.
Yeah.
I was saying to a friend of mine the other day, just around living in Africa and living here, and I said, you know what I never, ever worry about in Africa? That there'll be a shooting at a school. Never. Yeah. There are 0 shootings at schools. And so, in that regard, yes, I'm just thinking in terms of, because you hear people who come 20, 30, 40 years later to say, I was molested as a child, and so I imagine it was still dangerous. Maybe
that was
now,
happening even, unfortunately.
But I think now there's a culture of sort of parents responding in a way that is protective of the child, which was not as commonplace before.
Yeah.
I think the way that we are parenting is giving voice to children, and so they are believed more often than they're not believed. What some could argue maybe too much. I do believe there's there's a part of it where the world is being made to seem more dangerous than it is, and things that are not as dangerous are made to seem
and
dangerous.
I shouldn't say made to. I'm thinking like how you being born in 1987, right? You're a millennial, so you have had a long-term sort of experience now of being engaged with online content. And so you're seeing, those of you who are parents who are millennials, you're seeing a lot more things that always existed but probably weren't visual, or you can't. Like right now, people probably go on social media, I imagine, and they talk about those kinds of traumas, right? And so if you
all the buzzwords,
so I can see how the stuff was always there, but it wasn't as embedded in your mind, maybe in quite the same way.
Yeah, I mean, for me, in terms of social media, phones, I'm just like, all of us are addicted, like adults. All of us are addicted, and so for a kid, and one of my favorite people on the internet is Simon Sinek, and he says, letting your child loose on social media is like opening your alcohol cabinet and just going, oh well, you'll be responsible. Just in terms of just in terms of how unsheltered it is, right? Like anyone has access to you. You have access to everyone, and so with because I think it also is about your brain, like the part of your brain that is prioritizing keeping yourself safe, assessing risk has not fully developed, and so you are innocently susceptible to anything, essentially.
And we all have to, online or not, guard our minds, what you're absorbing.
And exposing yourself to. Okay. So as someone from Southern Africa, I was interested to learn that you, what you think about Ubuntu, when maybe you were first introduced to the concept of Ubuntu, and if it affects your work in any way.
Yeah, so I'm a firm believer in, although these conversations are difficult to have in some spaces, For example, I recently asked a group of people, I won't say who they are, but I asked a group of people just a basic question like, oh, does your family, for example, celebrate Kwanzaa? Now, I know Kwanzaa is a Western creation. It's not, out of the African context, but it is inclusive of, right, the principle of umoja, right, and so unity. And so their reaction immediately was, right? And so that's what I meant by in some spaces it might be difficult to have these conversations because I think that you have to first explain to people, well, what do you mean? Do I celebrate that, right? Because if they think it somehow conflicts with religion, and it's not about religion, it's about culture, right? But to answer your question, the last time I taught Black psychology here at WSSU was in spring 2023, and we talked about Ubuntu in the class, as well as, we watched some videos or whatever. And so I was asking the students about it, and they were saying being at an HBCU, they feel like they are connected strangers. And I said, okay, what does that mean? And it's like, well, there's something about being together and the whole I am because we are, and we're a collective that you feel being a Black student at an HBCU. But because of the this is my word, they didn't use this word, but because of the environment, the sociocultural world that we're in now, we're walking with our headphones on across campus, and sometimes we don't feel comfortable to lock eyes with someone and smile and feel that I am because we are, or you're a part of me, or that whole extended self, because we're also very much locked into our individual strivings. But it still feels good to be here seeing other people who look like me.
Who dress like you.
Yes. So in small moments like that, I try to incorporate more of, well, what is it about that makes you feel so good, so that they can actually think about it, because sometimes they're just feeling it, but they've never really discussed why do you, what is it about it that feels good, right? Because you see that person as also being connected to you or somehow similar to you. You may not have grown up in the exact same type of social class of a family. You may, have different family structure, but even different style in terms of your fashion. But there's something about being on the campus and feeling like there's kind of a family or unity feeling.
I kind of understand the connected strangers piece, just also because we don't invest in relationships, right, anymore. And so it's a stranger. Yes, it is definitely better than the experience, because I think the opposite of being in an HBCU and seeing people who look like you is understanding who is looking at you as well. And so being at a PWI, part of the racial stress and drama, is being observed by someone whose thoughts right? And whose thoughts are not necessarily positive about you or whatever they think you are. But that connected stranger piece I get, which is the opposite of Ubuntu, right? Because Ubuntu is definitely about deep connections.
Right.
So not just a personal relationship, but a deep connection even beyond.
Not feeling like a stranger.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, but I told her, I remember the student who said it. I said, I like that use of that term you're using. I was like, I'm going to give you credit for that if I ever, write about that. But because it was such a good way to express to me what they were feeling, like, yeah, I mean, we kind of get what you're saying about Ubuntu, but I guess we don't really have it all the way because they also brought up social media, like, okay, because if you stare in somebody's eyes too long and smiling at them nowadays, they'll think you're weird, and, you know, they could post something about you online. So I was like, oh, okay, so it's all of that interfering
with humanness.
Yeah.
And I also don't think it's a HBCU specific thing, because white students experience the same thing of not being connected. And it's funny, somebody who has a company called Ubuntu was saying she wanted to name her company after the thing that white people don't have. Because she's whatever story, you know, she had, but the story was when white people came to Southern Africa, the description of them was that they're people who do not have Ubuntu, and that's when Ubuntu, not that that's when it became a thing, but it was a descriptor of humanness that Western capitalist colonial culture lacked, right? And so, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, and also like, in a class like Black Psych, it's also like an opportunity to get them to see how much their worldview is quite Western and individualistic, as I guess it is expected because you're born and raised in this culture. But there's still remnants of stuff you can't name that feels healthy to you. But again, because of the culture of the West, you're afraid to be too extended self. You're a part of me because you don't want to be ostracized or deemed to be kind of weird.
And then they also deal with cancel culture, right? If you say the wrong thing, all of a sudden, like, you're almost erased from existence.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all the questions I had for you.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed our conversation. I don't know if we want to pull the brainwaves back up, if there's anything. Oh, oops. Did we lose you?
Did we lose it?
Are you alive, Dr.
Am I alive? I don't know. It was there just moments ago, because when we were talking about something, I looked and I saw that it was there, but I don't know what's going on. But anyway.
Maybe it's a natural place
It's a natural segue to closure.
Thank you so much for conversing with us. I'm excited to post this. I think we will look at the actual brainwaves and see if we can add like some commentary around where the conversation created changes and your feedback.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.